Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum to all of our audiences. This is being broadcast on my Facebook page on Bayna and also on Bayna Live on YouTube. As is typical of me, I announced that in a couple of hours from now, I'm going to be going on live, and here I am 15 minutes later. So what you'll all have to bear with me, Jazakumullahu khairan, for scrambling and making this work. I just landed not too long ago back in Texas and had to run over and get this all sorted out. So I'm going to blame this all on jet lag, even though I was flying within the country. In any case, I'd like to introduce the guests that I have with me today for this discussion. First of all, Ibrahim Khan, who holds a BA in Philosophy, Politics, and Economics from the University of Oxford, an Alimiya degree from the As-Salam Institute, and an MA in Islamic Finance. He was previously a private equity venture funds lawyer, and he is the co-founder of Islamic Finance Guru. Assalamu alaikum, Ibrahim.
Wa alaikum salam.
Next up, I have Mohsin Patel, who is the co-founder of Islamic Finance Guru, Oxford graduate, and a member of Forbes 30 Under 30. He's a former corporate lawyer at one of the world's largest U.S. firms, whilst running IFG. Mohsin is also actively interested and invested in the Web3 crypto space. Assalamu alaikum, Mohsin.
Wa alaikum salam.
And last but not least, I've got with us Mufti Faraz Adam, who is the director of the global Sharia advisory firm Amana Advisors, and he has a passion for Islamic fintech and advises various fintechs globally. Thank you for being with us, Mufti Faraz, also. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Okay, so I'm going to get right to it. I'm going to try to just kind of orient all of our viewers for the kind of discussion I'm trying to have with you guys. I've been hearing from friends, people that I have, that colleagues, others that are involved in tech, finance, and these kinds of industries that, you know, the words crypto, blockchain, NFTs, these things are being thrown around quite a bit. I'll be the first to admit I understand little to nothing of these things. And whatever little discussions I've been able to have, I've only come up with more questions than answers. At the same time, lots of people on social media have thrown that question my way and trying to understand an Islamic perspective on this stuff. And my first thought was an Islamic perspective on anything would first demand that we understand what the thing itself is, right? So we're jumping to the halal, haram, good, evil discussion before actually having a grasp of what it is that we're dealing with. And that was the motivation behind inviting all of you to this discussion. Hopefully we'll have a structured discussion. I've got some questions outlined here that I'd like to throw your way. I also want to caveat this by saying that this is meant to be a concise and comprehensive kind of bird's eye view of the subject matter. And I wanted to take this opportunity for the Muslim audiences, others who want to know more about this stuff, to be able to connect with the guests that I have beyond this, because this is their space. So you can take those discussions further for those of you that are looking for more details. Anyway, so let's start this off. I'll start with you, Ibrahim, and that is, help me understand, what is blockchain technology?
It's a great question. So I think for a Muslim audience, the best way to understand it is, hufad. And, you've got this concept where if all the Qurans in the world were destroyed, you could take the different hufad with all of their different memories and you could reconstruct the Quran very, very quickly. Right. That is a storage of information that is decentralized. And so the really powerful thing about that is that no one person is in charge of what the authoritative Quran is. Contrast that to, let's say, the Pope, or let's say certain traditions. It really depends. Like the authoritative Bible is the Bible that is owned by X person, or the oldest Bible in existence. Right. And so the person who owns that has all of the power over that data ultimately. So it's ultimately about storage of information, transmission of information, and power, and that being decentralized.
I see. Okay, so what does that have to do with the world of money and assets and finance?
Yeah, so with with your typical bank, HSBC or Barclays, or whoever you're using across the world, what usually is happening is that all of that information around payments and all of that information around what money you own is sat within these central databases that are owned by these large financial institutions. And so what happens is they are then the intermediaries necessarily for every single financial transaction that happens. And that means that they can always take their margin and they always have a huge position of influence. And also because the system is set up by a government, the government has a lot of control over this as well, because they can control interest rates, they can print money, they can do things like that. Now, in contrast, on the blockchain, in the blockchain world, if you are storing the payment there, if you have a wallet that is very clearly yours, in this decentralized world, then you cut out that middleman and you cut out the people who set the rules. So the rules are now not set by, let's say, laws. They're now set by the contract or the code that governs however that money or that wallet is going to work. So in a nutshell, in the payment space, the key thing is that you're getting rid of that intermediary and you're trusting automation and contracts.
Mufti Falaz, building from that, a big part of that discussion is defining cryptocurrency. And I'd like you to take a stab at helping our audiences understand that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I guess everybody knows what Bitcoin is, right? That's the most famous, potentially, crypto out there.
Oh, we've all heard of it. We're not sure what it is, but yeah, we've heard of it.
I don't like using the word cryptocurrency because what that does is it makes everybody think that crypto is just about currencies, right? Therefore, there's a better term to potentially use, which is used by practitioners in the market, which is crypto assets or even digital assets, right?
Okay.
To make people aware and understand that there's more to crypto than just a currency or means of exchange. Okay. And so, as Ibrahim was mentioning, all this takes place in the digital world, right? We have a real economy, right? Your land, your real estate, the things that we see around us. You have a financial economy. That's your shares, your bonds, and all these things that has been happening over the last 50, 60 years. But now we've moved to like a digital world where you can trade digital assets. You can interact digitally with people, right? You can get access to digital services. So in a digital setup, how do you transfer value? How do you exchange things, right? What's the medium of exchange? What's the way to speak to one another, right? And that's your crypto. Your crypto asset or this token is what you use to pay people potentially. So there's many types of cryptos. So one is a means of payment, which is your cryptocurrency, if you want to call it that, like Bitcoin. But then you have governance tokens as well. So certain cryptos, you can use that to vote on a decentralized system, like a blockchain, which Ibrahim was speaking about earlier, right? So that's a different type of crypto. So it's not used for making payments, and therefore it's not a currency in any way, shape, or form, but it's just a token, right, or a vote that you can have. Alternatively, there's other crypto assets out there which are used as asset-backed tokens. So you can tokenize gold, right? So whoever owns this token, it has a certificate, a digital certificate for gold locked in a particular vault. And you can redeem that gold by presenting this token, right? So
it's similar to certificates that governments issue sometimes for
exactly
possession of gold.
Yeah, so it's just that, but on the digital, it's working in a different infrastructure, right? And then you have utility tokens, which are quite famous, like on the Ethereum platform, where you can access certain services by utilizing this utility token. Or you have security tokens, and that's very similar to the concept of purchasing shares or stocks, where when you have a security token, you have an interest in equity in a company, right? So there's many types of cryptos out there. Not all of them are the same. They play a different function, but they are working within a digital world, which has its own kind of rules and setup. So to understand that with the same principles of the way the world works, the physical world, will not do justice. We have to understand it from that particular lens.
So
because
let me throw something at you here. We all live in a fairly digitized world even before the emergence of this technology and wire transfers. You're going to the grocery store and paying things with your credit or debit card. So much of you're purchasing something online. Much of the world's commerce today is digital to begin with, right? So this is a new kind of digital exchange, but it's not, in a sense, I don't find it as revolutionary as one might think that, oh my God, now we're going to have the digital marketplace. Well, the digital marketplace has already existed, and we are not in the age of paper ledgers for transactions, and we haven't been there for a long time. So what I want you to help me understand is, what is the big, besides decentralization, is there really such a drastic shift from what is essentially a kind of digital economy? The money I have in the bank is essentially zeros and ones, from what I can understand. It's just data. And this simply seems to be assets that are associated with digital. It's just data at the end. So what's the significant shift here?
The word decentralized potentially the key there, right? Because look, the current system that we work in, if that's known as traditional finance or TradFi, in relation to DeFi, decentralized finance.
So you're getting to my next question. Yeah, okay.
Right. And I think that's where the key, if we understand that well, we understand the kind of barriers and the roadblocks are there when it comes to working in the current system. And what DeFi does and what this crypto space does and this digital space does is it removes many of those barriers potentially, right? It's not always the best. It's, sometimes it's better not to use DeFi. Personally, I would say, right? Many a times the traditional system.
Give me a scenario where it's not good to use DeFi. We'll get to, maybe we should define DeFi a little bit better. Want to help me with that, Mohsin?
Yeah, sure. So decentralized finance is pretty much extending on this concept that Mufti Saab is talking about here. So it's this idea that, as Ibrahim was alluding to, or you were alluding to as well, Ustad, where you've got money in the bank, which is zeros and ones. And when we've got that, we're trusting, HSBC or whoever it is,
right?
That, these are the zeros and ones. And yes, they've built up a certain amount of clout and trust in society. But what decentralized finance is all about is about taking, those players out of the equation. And where you've got blockchain, which is an immutable, meaning you cannot change this. This is, a mathematically solved thing that this transaction cannot happen unless it is correct, unless it is true, and it cannot then be changed. And there is a record of it forever. So in this world of DeFi, we're taking, the HSBC or whichever bank it might be out of the equation, and we're replacing that with something that you can trust, a record that this thing exists. So in a nutshell,
let me understand that better. So hypothetically, just to dumb this down, because I really like dumbing things down. So I have a bank transaction. I pulled out some money from the ATM or whatever. The record of that transaction sits with the bank, and they can provide me a receipt, but at the end of the day, I'm trusting their servers or their agency to withhold that information. And I know there are banks here in the US, at least, that after a certain number of years erase your record. So you can only go back so many years. I'd like to print my bank statements from 10 years ago. I'm sorry, we only keep 5 years because we have to make room for it. But you're saying by contrast, instead of going to a bank or to the institution with which you had the transaction is now in a common universal space. Is that what you're saying? The record of that transaction is,
Exactly. So, and the key thing as well to bear in mind, Ustad, is that all of this, the real, in my opinion, kind of magic here is that all of this relies on people and open source information. So, the code, for example, that governs a smart contract will be open source. You can look at that, you can verify that, you can know who contributed to that. This is a world where people are the actors, not big central organizations.
So does that mean that it doesn't allow for privacy in transactions? Like all records are public?
To a certain extent, yes, you're right. So wallet transactions are public. So in theory, if you know that a certain wallet number is associated with X person, that is a public thing. You would know that. So if I knew what Elon Musk's wallet was, I could very quickly look at his transactions. That is certainly true.
Was that the problem that you were referring to, Mufti Saab? Like, there are times where DeFi is not the best thing?
Yeah, I mean, if I own a business, right, a small business, right, why would I need to use a blockchain to record my data and send money? I can just use the traditional finance, right, to store my data. Like I can use Google Cloud servers, I won't have to pay people, experts who know how to run the blockchain and store data. So there's a lot of cost savings in that model. So it just depends on what you're trying to do, how many people are involved. If I'm a small business or just a group of us, I don't have so many parties that need my information, then there's no need to have a blockchain kind of like database. So it just depends how many people are involved and what you're really doing. And so for a small setup or a business, you wouldn't need blockchain as a ledger.
My mind even immediately goes to like the contrast between, let's say, nonprofit organizations versus, business ventures. And a business has vested interest in perhaps keeping some of its investments, transactions private, because competitors want to know where these people are investing and maybe get the, get inside information. And in the world of competitive businesses, you don't want everybody to know what transactions, what investments, what moves you're making. But on the flip side, in nonprofit organizations, I think this represents an amazing opportunity for transparency, because corruption in the nonprofit or government sectors, right? Because people are donating money to a cause, understanding that it's for a certain cause, and yet lavish bonuses are being passed out or whatever is happening behind the scenes. And so long as the legal benchmark for tax reporting is okay, and yes, there is a disclosure. Nonprofits have to disclose their transactions, but I also believe in the power of accountants being able to cook books, right? So, in that sense, I do see a really amazing advantage of some kinds of transactions in the world being absolutely transparent. But I also see the problem of other kinds of transactions being transparent at all. So that's the. Are there any fail-safes here? Yeah.
There's a thing here about pseudonymity. So there's complete transparency on who the person is, but then the fact is that we don't even know who created Bitcoin. We know he's called Satoshi Nakamoto, but we don't actually know who he is. So there's this kind of weird interim level of disclosure that you can actually adopt here as well. So there's that to think about. And there are actually ways where some of the big players in this space, they actually trade a lot of this crypto stuff offline. It's called in their cold wallets. So they don't even put it onto the public wallet themselves because of these precise reasons, and then they kind of aggregate it, and then it'll go through a crypto exchange or something, which then just sorts it all out in the back end, so it never really appears. So there's a lot of really fast moving technology that's happening in the back end, but these are the exact kind of questions that right now everyone in the crypto space is exploring.
I just want to add to that, right? Because when it comes to crypto exchanges and everything, you have a public address, right? A public key and a private key. So the public key is just a string of numbers. So you wouldn't necessarily know who it is, right? It's just a string of numbers.
Okay.
So that's something to bear in mind. But when you're working with a blockchain, that's where potentially there's more transparency.
Got it. So it is in a sense encrypted because it's just an obscure number ID, and unless you yourself inform somebody of what that is, they wouldn't be able to identify you directly.
Yeah,
it's the equivalent of me sharing an IBAN number. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know who that belongs to.
Right. Would governments know?
No,
because governments like to trace transactions for whatever reasons.
With I guess this is another kind of area of DeFi when it relates to transactions which are untraceable somewhat. There is a bounty actually on a company called Monero, which
a bounty, like
from the US government, a bounty
for capturing
for capturing how it works. Yes, not for capturing necessarily the people behind it, but they have cracked, and you can kind of research this perhaps offline. But they have there are different projects that are going after different things. So DeFi is not just about all this stuff that we're talking about. There are different uses of the technology. So you could say that DeFi is great for faster settlement, no hassle international transfers, for example. Like, for example, in my business, I pay a lot of people abroad. And I don't know about the US, but certainly from the UK, there are certain jurisdictions where it's very, very difficult to pay to, even if you're a
Not to mention
completely
the fees that are involved. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So DeFi kind of cuts through that. Then there are a whole bunch of streams, is basically what I'm saying. So privacy is like one area of that as well.
Okay. I think I've got a decent grasp of these things. Mohsen, you help me with this one too. What in the world is Web 3.0?
Web 3.0 is the way I like to describe it is a borrowed analogy from someone much smarter than me. So I'll just use that instead, because why reinvent the wheel? So the way that it has been described is that we have lived through several kind of turns of the web. So Web 1 was the initial kind of advent of the internet in many ways, and that's where we saw people putting things like catalogs online, and they call that read or read only. This was where you were basically
Static
looking.
info. Yeah.
Sorry.
It was static information.
Exactly.
Right.
And then as the web advanced, and as people got more used to technology and they started wanting to live a bit more in the internet, we had the advent of platforms like this, Facebook and YouTube and Instagram, and there were forums that were coming online, etc.
Right.
And they call that era Web 2, which is read and write. So we went from read to read and write, and the advent that is now coming is Web 3, which is read, write, and own. And the own bit is coming from this concept of decentralization. So, we talked earlier about how these large companies are often the gatekeepers to information, knowledge, a lot of data, and of course, they make a lot of money from it. But in this new world of Web 3, where we have things like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, which I can talk briefly on as well.
Yeah.
But this idea is that in Web 3, as I said before, people are the actors. People are contributing to things that they are good at, knowledgeable on. And we've got these, in this day and age, you can quickly amass an army of people all across the world who are very passionate about a particular thing, and instead of that being a central company that creams the profits off, that then is its own little thing, and the people participating in it and contributing to it get rewarded for it. And they can get rewarded for it, as Mufti Faraz was saying earlier, through perhaps a governance token that is associated with this thing. So let's give it a really simple.
It sounds like a gaming thing to me right now.
Yeah,
it sounds like a gaming environment. Tokens and participation and earning tokens, and that making you more influential, or assets. Like, sounds like Age of Empires or something. I don't know.
100%. I think that's a good analogy, and a lot of the infrastructure that you actually see in the early days of Web3, which is where we are now, actually stemmed from the gaming world. So a lot of the discussion, for example, happens on Discord. I don't know if you've heard of Discord, but it started off as a gaming kind of chat thing.
Yeah.
So just to give a really simple example for your viewers, let's say you, for example, decided to start a DAO tomorrow, and there were people.
Wait, DAO, decentralized
autonomous organization.
Autonomous. Okay, so that is a virtual organization.
Exactly, and typically it's people that come together around a common cause. So examples in the real world are, there was a DAO that was formed for buying the US Constitution. So literally people were putting money into this DAO, and the idea was that we together will buy, or we will bid for, the US Constitution. It didn't work out, but it showed the early kind of promise.
How old was this? When did this happen?
Pretty recently, I think it was a few months back. They failed because they did something silly, which is they publicly disclosed what their bid was going to be, and they got outbid. But that aside,
you can buy the U.S. Constitution. I'm still stuck on that part.
It was up for auction a few months ago. So look it up maybe afterwards. It's called Constitution DAO.
Okay.
It's still going, and it's the reason it's interesting is because it showed the kind of early promise of DAOs. But the point with DAOs is that you can form groups around anything. So if you formed a DAO, for example, or perhaps it wouldn't even be you that formed it. It might even be your fans, for example, that formed it. And you've got people that are really willing and happy to contribute to things. They get rewarded through a token. Those tokens, for example, could be the entry ticket or the VIP ticket to a future event that you do, and that's how reward for participation can work. So look, there are a lot of possibilities here. What we're doing here is we're hypothesizing about a world that is kind of there, and is coming, but isn't here exactly yet. And the thing that I think, especially as Muslims who are trying to advance as an ummah and get ahead of the curve of the future wave, the challenge that we've got is we need to shift the mindset entirely. So you can't come to Web3 with like a Web2 kind of mentality. Like it just doesn't work. So the analogy I would give here is back when the internet was coming out, so in the kind of 90s, there were people then that said email's never going to work, people are never going to buy things on the internet, it's just not going to happen. And things change quicker than you think.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine having a conversation down the road and somebody's like, "You're so Web 2.0." So
I say it to Ibrahim all the time.
So now the scary two questions. The scary one to me is, because I saw that Facebook ad, the metaverse. Seems like an immersive digital experience that will disconnect people from the real world, and they'll never come out of their basement. And the only time they'll take the goggles off is to go to the bathroom. So help me understand what the relationship with this conversation we've had so far is with the metaverse, and what this thing is, and why is the tech space so excited about it?
Yeah, so the metaverse is, as we've been discussing, the best analogy to it is like the World of Warcraft online kind of live, where you log in, or Call of Duty online kind of, you can roam around and do stuff. It's similar to those things in the sense that it's always live, and you can drop in and out. You can interact with people who are also live at the time. And I think, but the interesting thing with the metaverse is its strong ties with virtual reality. So you've got these Oculus headsets that Facebook is working on and others are working on, and I think Apple's in the running with this as well. Microsoft's in the running with this,
Right.
And what's going to start happening now that you've got the digital infrastructure and the payment rails, plus you've got this virtual reality, and you've got this Web 3.0 thing going on, is that you're setting up for more and more time of a person to be spent in this space. And actually, I think you and I might think, hang on a second, and I thought this a few weeks back. I was like, why would someone actually do that? It just sounds bonkers. But actually, the key
bonkers
play
for the rest of us means crazy. Okay.
So why would you do that? And I think the key thing is the business angle here, because a lot of technology gets adopted via the business route, because it's very possible, it's very probable, in fact, that you could see a large tech company saying, actually, this kind of sense of presence that we get with all of our remotely distributed workers, but all of us get a virtual reality headset on and we're actually in the same room. There's a real sense of presence to that. So let's buy everyone a virtual reality headset. And that way, now you have these virtual reality headsets kicking around, in bedrooms across all of America and the world. And then people start thinking about, okay, what are the consumer angles that we can bring to this? And then people start using that native technology. They're already in this space. They know how it works to do lots of interesting things. So I guess building on really the point that Mohsin was making, which is that the really fascinating stuff with this technology is yet to come. We're seeing glimpses of it, but the really fascinating stuff is that which uses the new technology or the new rails and achieves things that weren't ever possible before. So, for example, Web 2.0 came along and Facebook was possible for the first time. An online social media platform was just not possible in Web 1.0 or before the internet. But for the first time, you have a new experience entirely, or Instagram or TikTok. So what we're going to see coming is one of those things. So I think that's why it's interesting for Muslims to really think about this new technology and this new space and just like spend time in it to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I see it, taking a step back, I see it as an incredible new world of commerce and of maybe even social change. But at the same time, I could see the dark side even now. Like there's just like social media, as powerful a connector for humanity it has become, it also has a very dark side. And if this is going to be such an immersive experience, there are real considerations to have here about everything ranging from mental health to its implications on, even I would think, physical health, education, spirituality. I mean, there are other implications. There are very human implications of far-reaching technologies like these. So there's a lot to process as this stuff emerges. I think also for Muslims, we're gonna have to. We have a tradition of like akhlaq and of adab and of principles applied to like how to deal with family, how to. We have the sunnah is filled with things like how to eat with your right hand or what foot to enter into the home with, etc. So we have this. We're a culture of mannerism, and we're a religion of mannerisms, and I think it's going to be a necessity for Muslims to develop ethics and principles of engaging in this new world. Not necessarily from a fatwa point of view, but just simply ethics of and we have the universal like ethics of communication, right? And we have an entire body of literature in our deen that deals with the ethics of communication, things like ghiba and namima and ifk, and we have these things, right? And I think it's important that we re-educate the ummah or educate the ummah anew on how to apply those principles in the digital space. So somebody can literally give a khutbah about a principle and then violate it in the comment section later on for the you know what I'm saying? So we've kind of disconnected the real world teachings from the digital world. And I think that's going to be, at least from the Islamic point of view, I think that's going to be an absolute necessity. Because outside of that, the addictive potential of this stuff is terrifying, frankly.
Absolutely. There's a famous thought experiment by a guy called Robert Nozick. He wrote a book called Anarchy, State and Utopia. And in it, it's this kind of like the idea that, what if you could create this kind of, it's the pleasure machine, you probably heard of it, where if, let's say, someone could just live the perfect life where, he's just getting pleasure. It's, he's running the perfect life, and he only ever really comes out. He doesn't even come out. It's just all of his like fluids and things are just handled.
Stay in the matrix. That's it. Yeah.
Exactly. And the question is, is that better? Is there something more real than that? And obviously, we as Muslims would say yes.
Yeah.
But I think we might be headed in that direction.
Yeah, terrifying. Anyway, one last question for all of you, and I'm going to start with Muhsin, yourself. Help me understand NFTs.
Sure. So NFTs stands for non-fungible token.
Okay.
And the idea is that this is it's a digital token. It lives on the blockchain, and there are alternatives to the blockchain as well, but we won't go down that route. And the idea is that this thing, I mean, it's non-fungible, right? So there's only one of these things, and the way that I would describe them is they're a really interesting mechanism to wrap up an asset in many ways. So what I mean by that is, I mean, there are broadly two types of asset here that we're talking about. We've got real world physical assets. So, Mufti Sab alluded earlier to something like gold, or I would add into that bracket something like, a vintage car, or a
physical tangible assets. Yeah,
exactly. And then you've got digital assets, so things that are natively digital. And we've probably heard in the past year or so, the hype around NFTs. They've become particularly popular because of digital art. There's a lot of celebrities that are getting in on buying certain types of NFT.
Mhm.
What I wanted to stress, though, is that NFTs is not equal to just digital art. That is one use case for them, but in the round, they're a really, really useful asset for doing basically what I said earlier: wrapping up an asset, making it live on the blockchain so that it definitely belongs to you. There's a record of.
So even if they're digital copies of it, because it's an image at the end of the day, right? Or an animation or whatever, it's some kind of video, right? So that's what I had a hard time understanding. Okay, so somebody owns it, but somebody else has a screenshot of it.
Yeah, the classic right-click save as camp.
Yeah.
So I mean, what I would say here is let's just understand the world that we live in to try and help understand this world. So, we've talked over the course of this session about this new world, right? So we talked about the metaverse. We've talked about all of these different things. In the real world, people don't like really going out with like a fake Gucci top or a knockoff Bentley or something like that. It is human instinct to have nice things and be able to show those nice things. And in this world where we have a metaverse and you've got your house, your plot of land, you've got nice things there. You will literally display if I mean, as I said, NFTs is not just digital art, but if you've got digital art, you will literally display it, and it will be instantly recognizable if this is a fake or something real. And these things are gaining more and more value ascribed to them. So there are certain NFTs that are very highly sought after. And these things bring with them, rightly or wrongly, I'm not talking about the ethics of kind of materialism here, but these things bring with them a certain value. And
so on that, I want to ask you this. So my background was in digital design, and I was a design director at a company before, and I used to freelance also. And this is all, of course, this is Web 1.0 times, right?
Mm.
And even since then, the idea, the first place my mind went is, well, are we already in a world where we purchase digital assets that are purely digital and not anything but data? And we certainly do. We license software. We're in fact using operating systems that we've purchased. We buy apps on our phones. And then digital art in the world of graphic design, when I'm supposed to make an ad or I'm supposed to design a poster or whatever, you go to these image databases, warehouses, and you purchase and license a graphic, and you have limited use of it. And though it's a digital asset, you had to pay for it. It's nothing tangible that you have in your hands, right? So everything from templates to graphic design, and of course software is actually an exchange of digital assets already in the real world. That's not something that any of us are unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm.
What seems to be new to me here in the NFT space is correct me if I'm wrong, it's specifically art. It's specifically a visual image or an animation of some kind that's now being considered a unique digital asset that cannot be replicated or not replicated authentically. Art is licensed in a sense to one person. So it's a digital Mona Lisa kind of thing.
Yeah. So I would probably say that NFTs are not just art. So NFTs are they're a tool to kind of wrap that art up, and then for you to then transpose it into the metaverse and do all kinds of other things with it. But what NFTs can also be used for is to digitize real world assets. So in that example that I gave earlier, I could buy, for example, vintage Ferrari, and for me to kind of tokenize that or split that up and sell that off for people to then invest in is a lot easier in this world of NFTs. It's certainly possible right now. I could make a company. I could create, certificates. I could then go out and say, hey, do you want to, buy a part, 1% of this Ferrari because it's going to appreciate in value, and I'll give you this, share in my company, etc. Certainly possible. But in this new world where you can instantly verify, Muhsin did buy this vintage Ferrari. It was real. It was from a real dealer. He has got ownership of it. Here is this smart contract that tells me that I will get, 1% of it when I send over however many ETH or whatever token I'm sending. So it's the same but different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how, like, a use case, like, somebody suggested to me, for example, that for Bayina, people are actually starting to reach out and ask, hey, can we contribute to sponsoring students by way of NFTs? Can you guys make NFTs? I'm like, I don't know what an NFT is. I don't know what to tell you. You want me to just? Some people just saw my toe up here, and maybe I should make an NFT of my toe, like I saw my toe up here.
That's the kind of thing that goes really viral.
Viral. Yeah.
I think it'll work. Just judging from the interest engaged.
I was literally thinking that. I was like, I need to take a picture of this and try and make some money.
It's forever recorded. It's on the blockchain now.
I think there's actually like there's a thought here, which is that like the thing that gives value to artwork is our society. We don't like looking at a fake Mona Lisa. We look like looking at a real one. Right. So and we've grown up in the society, especially people under 20, in this meme world. So you've got the Will Smith and Chris Rock meme doing the rounds, right. And you've got all these other memes doing the rounds. Like if you've been growing up in that world and now you're in this metaverse where you spend at least half your time, the value of digital assets just massively changes. Like what you wear in the metaverse becomes really material as the real world, because why wouldn't it?
And people are buying enhancements in video games all the time, new skins and things like that. They're paying money for it. Now, the side of it that I wanted to ask, so from the Islamic point of view, what are some glaring criticisms or somebody might have that say, okay, well, this is why this violates a Sharia principle? The NFTs in particular, what could they be?
It all comes down to utility, right? From a Sharia perspective, everything which has utility is beneficial for people is typically permissible, right? And whatever helps people get closer to Allah, be beneficial in the world, be productive, it all falls under permissibility. Now, if we look at this space where people are just gaming, spending money on skins within a game, are they wasting time? Is that really beneficial for people? Would we want our children spending 10 hours on some kind of headset, right? Is that good for them, right? There's so much, research written on children and the harmful effects of just gaming continuously, right?
Yeah.
So is that something beneficial? These are some of the discussions we need to have, I think, as adults and really think about it. And also when it comes to NFTs, I think some of the Sharia principles, and I've written an entire article on this, is like, if it's animation and images, of course, one of the first considerations is that the animation should represent something which is lawful to see, right?
Right.
You can't be mocking people either through your animation. You can't
violate one of the core principles of the deen. Like
all of those things, right?
And namima, et cetera, et cetera. Right.
You can't do any of that, right? So these are some of the things to consider when it comes to NFTs and art in particular. But then NFTs can also be tickets, right? You get NFTs which are tickets to events, because these events are unique. See, anything which is unique can be tokenized by an NFT. So that data can be put into an NFT token, and you'd have access to that thing that you've tokenized. Right. So you can have an event, a Bayina event, where you need an NFT for entry, right? And only if you have an NFT. There's so many things you can do, right? But this is one of even tokens can be used for this, a normal token. But these are some of the use cases that we can have, which is beneficial and no problem. It's just another means of interacting with people.
I heard somebody raise a criticism to me, and I like to give any thought that is countering what I'm thinking about a real, let it rattle in my mind for a little bit and process it. And somebody talked about how, there's a Sharia requirement for an asset to be backed by something, right? Or something along these lines. And I started questioning that idea at its core. I really wanted to understand it well for myself. Like, if much of the value in the world, in the tangible world, comes actually from perception. I mean, even something as tangible as gold has value because humanity has ascribed a value to it. So with and the dollar or a company like the stock market, but even something as basic as a vintage car, it is valuable not because it's old, because technically the older a car gets, the less valuable it should be. But there's a perception and there's a social value. We could call it arbitrary because it's not tangible, but it was ascribed to it as such. And the world operates in that way. Historical documents like the Constitution has an enormous amount of value, while the paper isn't, it's worthless scrap. You can get much better quality paper at your local paper store, right? So I started questioning this idea that you have to have some kind of tangible or solid backing behind an asset beyond perception at a principle level. Am I wrong in thinking like this?
No, I totally agree with what you're saying. Look, there were some scholars classically, like Imam Haskafi, rahimahullah, a famous jurist. He just mentioned the word ain, which means tangible asset, right? From a legal perspective.
Yeah.
But they were speaking in that context when a digital world wasn't even like feasible. Nobody would even perceive of that. From a Sharia perspective, it's not about tangibility. Neither is it about this word we hear, intrinsic value. Because what is value? It's just,
right.
It's relative, right? It's a philosophical term. It's not like a Sharia term, like intrinsic value. But from a Sharia perspective, it's all about utility. It's all about manfa'a and nafa'. That's the word that fuqaha and jurists use. So wherever there's benefit, or whichever asset has benefit, whether that asset is in the real world, the financial world, or the digital world, you can potentially buy that, sell that, own, transfer, and all these things.
Yeah, so let's talk about that benefit for a little bit. Let's explore that for a second. So, obviously a toothbrush has benefit, and but there are things that are in the world of art, in the world of literature, that are extremely valuable to humanity and to culture, that don't really have tangible benefit, or it's not like maybe black and white benefit, like a car or a bicycle or something like that, a vehicle that gets you from A to B, right? Even in the world of education, if there's kids are taking a math class, you can say, oh, there's a benefit. Or there's a science class, oh, there's a benefit. This leads to this, this, and this. And they're taking an art class, or they're taking a storytelling class, or whatever. Even in the world of art, there's enormous benefit. Art, for example, impacts a lot. There's so much data around how art and color scheming and branding and these things impact sales and commerce, and how a book is packaged. And there's so much that goes into every single successful product in the world that is not related to tangible benefit, or something like, or not just, I'm using the wrong word when I say tangible, but really easily gauge utility. When we say manfa'a, then manfa'a is actually not necessarily a black and white thing. It's a broader thing, and manfa'a can be relative depending on who you're talking. Someone in a certain space sees a lot of manfa'a in something, and someone else doesn't see it at all. So in different industries, different things have value, right? I'm reminded of baseball cards back in the day, right? Those things in America, these things are like, they were a crazy hot commodity. And now even there's a market for people who want to buy this old stuff, and it's these old pieces of cardboard that are insanely valuable. And I don't see how the principle that I come back to is, okay, so israf is something condemned in the deen. Tabdhir is something condemned, overspending and excessiveness and all this kind of stuff. But that doesn't necessarily invalidate the perceived value of these kinds of assets. If a Muslim that I know is like, hey, I invested in this baseball card, and I say it doesn't have a real benefit in society, therefore you violated it. I don't see it that way. I think it's an invested asset, and it has real value in a certain industry, and it's an investment that this person made. Other people, I actually know, when my contractor, he buys, crazy enough, he buys Nike sneakers, like there's only 4 of these ones made. He's got Nike sneakers that are like $10,000. He's got an entire gallery in his house of shoes, right? That's the weirdest thing to me, that he has sneakers and he invests in this stuff. He makes a lot of money doing this stuff, right? And it's still the same rubber and leather and shoelaces, but there's a perceived value. So this is where I wanted to get validation from you on, like from a Sharia perspective, from a fiqh perspective. Is there a scope? Is there a broad scope possible for manfa'a, for benefit?
Yeah, to be honest, there is definitely a broader scope than what we just said. Like, it has to be tangible, right? Of course, as long as nothing is infringing Sharia principles, right?
Right.
You can get inspirational benefit, inspirational manfa'a, like art. If I look at art, I get inspired.
Yeah.
So that is also a benefit, a mental benefit. It can be emotional benefit, right? Because that's a whole other dimension that humans are made up of so many different parts, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something physically consuming or physically doing.
Right.
But it's benefiting us. So anything which is inspirational, educational, or even physical benefit, all of these are different forms of benefit, which are absolutely fine. As long as it's not infringing any Sharia principle, you can benefit. And I would say the key thing is, it's something which people naturally incline to and they want to do, because people naturally Allah's designed us with a natural inclination towards things which are a benefit to us, right?
Right.
Most of the time, generally speaking, right?
Right.
So it's not a very difficult thing to gauge as well. It's something which, it's just common, people do.
Right. I really want to thank all of you for this really absolutely remarkable conversation. I think it's a good starting point. I think we got lots and lots of engagement online, so people have thrown out a lot of questions. What I'm going to do after this broadcast is done, if I can get a link to your article, Mufti Faraz, I'd like to post that on the Facebook page so people can read that. And also, if you guys are on Facebook or on any of the social media, send that my way so I can post those so people can engage with you, inshallah, and interact. If there's a need to have a follow-up discussion on some of the more emerging questions other than my toes, by the way, just for the rest of you, here you go, Candace. This one's for you. This is for you. Okay. So now that's out of your system. But if there are other, consistent questions that are coming, intelligent questions that are coming that I think deserve a conversation, perhaps we'll have this conversation again. But this has been really insightful. I really appreciate all of you coming onto this platform and to discuss this. And I'm hoping to create a culture of doing that, just to, if I have a curiosity about something, I just want to go to people that are immersed in that space and are experts and are studying it from a Sharia point of view, and also from a real world marketplace point of view, and just gain some insights from them. So thank you so very much, all of you, for coming. And inshallah, we'll continue talking at some point.
Real pleasure.